The massive crystal towers of Zerion Prime stretched into the purple sky like frozen lightning. Inside the grandest hall, creatures from across the galaxy had gathered for the most important meeting of the year. Some floated in bubbles of glowing gas. Others slithered across the polished floor on dozens of tentacles. A few stood tall on legs that bent in impossible directions. But they all had one thing in common today. They were laughing at Earth. Admiral Vextar stood at the center of the hall, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he spoke. His skin shimmered like oil on water, and his voice came through a small metal box that turned his alien words into something the other species could understand. He was enjoying this moment far too much. "My fellow council members," Vextar announced, his translated voice dripping with fake politeness, "today we examine humanity's request to join our great galactic family." He pressed a button, and suddenly the air above him came alive with images. This hologram showed a ship that looked like it had been built in someone's backyard. The hull was made of simple steel, painted white with Earth's blue and green flag on the side. Compared to the sleek alien vessels that could bend space and time, it looked like a child's toy made from scrap metal. "This," Vextar said, barely, containing his laughter, "is what they call their finest warship, the Defiance. Notice the primitive steel armor that any decent plasma weapon could melt in seconds. Observe their chemical rockets that push them forward by burning fuel like ancient fire sticks." The alien delegates began making sounds that their translators couldn't quite handle. Some chittered like angry insects. Others produced deep musical tones that sounded like whale songs. But the meaning was clear. They thought this was hilarious. Far away at the edge of Earth's solar system, Captain Li Hyun watched this humiliation unfold on his ship's main screen. He was a quiet man, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much. His black hair was starting to show grey at the edges, even though he was only 35. The stress of preparing for this moment had aged him. Standing beside him, Engineer Park Min-ho clenched his fists. He had spent 3 years building the Defiance's engines with his own hands, working 18-hour days to make them as efficient as possible. Next to him, Kim Soo-jin stared at the screen in disbelief. She had designed every backup system on the ship, making sure nothing could fail when they needed it most. At the pilot station, Choi Da-eun gripped her controls so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had learned to fly this ship better than anyone, knowing every vibration and sound it made. Behind her, weapons specialist Kang Ho-seok watched the aliens mock the guns he had carefully calibrated and tested. "Look at their propulsion system," another alien delegate spoke up. This one looked like a walking tree made of silver bark. "They burn chemicals to create thrust. We abandoned such methods 10,000 years ago. My species was building ships that could fold space when these humans were still living in caves." The laughter grew louder. Some aliens were actually rolling on the floor, their multiple limbs flailing in amusement. Others were sharing the images with friends back home, spreading the joke across the galaxy. "Their fastest ship," Vextar continued, highlighting the Defiance's specifications, "would take 800 years to travel between neighboring star systems. Our cargo ships move faster than their military vessels. They fix problems with adhesive strips and hope." Captain Hyun felt his crew's disappointment like a physical weight. They had all dreamed of this day, the day Earth would finally be accepted into the galactic community. They had imagined sharing knowledge with alien civilizations, learning about worlds beyond their imagination, trading ideas that could help both humanity and their new friends. Instead, they were being treated like barbarians, asking to join a university. "The vote is clear," Vextar announced after the laughter finally died down. "All in favor of rejecting Earth's application." 847 hands, tentacles, claws, and other appendages rose into the air. Motion passed unanimously. "These humans are not ready for galactic society. Perhaps they should try again in a few thousand years." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in uncomfortable silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The dream they had all shared was dead, killed by mockery and dismissal. Finally, Captain Hyun turned to his crew. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Set course for deep space. We're not going home empty-handed." "Sir?" Choi Da-eun asked, confused. "Hyun?" looked out at the stars through the ship's front window. They think we're too primitive to join their club. Maybe they're right about our technology, but they're wrong about us. We're going to show them what humans can really do. The Defiance had been floating in the darkness between stars for 3 months now, far from Earth and even farther from home. The ship creaked and groaned as it moved through space, making sounds that would terrify the crew of any high-tech alien vessel. But Captain Lee Hyun and his team had learned to love these noises. Each creak told them their ship was still, alive, still fighting. Down in the engine room, Kim Soo-jin was covered in grease up to her elbows. She had been working for 16 hours straight, trying to squeeze just a little more power from engines that were already running beyond their design limits. The cramped space was hot and smelled like burning metal, but she refused to give up. Every time the engines started to fail, she found a new way to fix them. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," she muttered, hitting a pipe with her wrench. Amazingly, the vibrations stopped. There we go, just needed some human touch. The engine room was a maze of pipes, wires, and jury-rigged systems that no engineer back on Earth would recognize. Kim had rebuilt everything at least twice, adding backup systems for the backup systems. When one part broke, she made a new one from spare metal. When they ran out of proper replacement parts, she created solutions that worked just as well. Up on the bridge, the rest of the crew was dealing with their own challenges. Earth Command had been sending angry messages for weeks, demanding they return home immediately. The transmissions came through as static-filled rants about unauthorized missions and wasted resources. Captain Hyun had finally turned off the communications array last Tuesday. They were on their own now. Pilot Choi Da-eun sat at her station, staring at screens full of numbers that made no sense. The navigation computer kept giving her error messages, claiming their position was impossible. According to the machine, they were somehow in 3 different places at once. But Da-eun had learned to ignore the computer and trust something else entirely. "Captain," she called out, not taking her eyes off the swirling stars outside the window. "I'm picking up something strange. The navigation computers are going crazy, but I think I can feel where we need to go." It sounded ridiculous when she said it out loud. How could someone feel direction in space? But over the past 3 months, Da-eun had developed an instinct for flying that no computer could match. She could sense gravitational pulls, predict solar wind patterns, and navigate through asteroid fields by gut feeling alone. Captain Hyun nodded without hesitation. He had seen his pilot perform miracles that made no sense on paper. While alien, ships needed quantum computers and artificial intelligence to plot courses. Da-eun could find her way, using nothing but intuition and experience. "The aliens rely too much on their machines," Hyun said, walking over to look at the star charts Park Min-ho had drawn by hand. "When their computers break, they're helpless. But humans, we adapt." Park Min-ho looked up from the tangle of wires he was working on. He had spent the last month rewiring half the ship's systems, installing manual controls for everything important. When the automatic systems failed, his crew could still fly the ship using switches, dials, and good old-fashioned human judgment. "We may not have their fancy phase drives or quantum processors," Hyun continued, addressing his entire crew, "but we have something they've forgotten, the ability to think our way through problems." The captain was right. Every alien ship they had seen in the holographic records was sleek, perfect, and completely dependent on advanced technology. If something went wrong, the ship's computer would either fix it automatically or shut down entirely. There was no middle ground, no creative solutions, but the Defiance was different. It was held together by human ingenuity, determination, and the stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be fixed. When parts broke, they made new ones. When systems failed, they built better ones. When the impossible happened, they found a way to make it possible. Kang Ho-seok had been quietly rebuilding the weapons console for what felt like the 100th time. The alien technology they had studied was incredibly advanced, but it was also incredibly fragile. One small malfunction, and the entire system would shut down for safety reasons. So he had designed something simpler, weapons that could be fired, manually if needed, targeting systems that worked even when the computers failed. "Sir," he said, looking up from his work with excitement in his voice, "I'm picking up a distress signal. "Looks like someone out there needs help." The signal was weak and full of static, but it was definitely a call for help. Someone was in trouble, and the Defiance was the only ship close enough to respond. This was exactly the kind of situation that had brought them out here in the first place. Captain Hyun smiled. Maybe the galaxy wasn't ready to accept Earth into their fancy council, but that didn't mean humans couldn't make a difference. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth wasn't through politics or diplomacy. It was by showing up when others needed you most. The mining station looked like a broken toy floating in the darkness. Kepler 7 had once been a busy place where alien workers dug valuable minerals from asteroids, but now it spun slowly through space, its lights flickering weakly. The station's hull was scarred with blast marks, and pieces of debris floated around it like a metal cloud. Captain Hyun could see the Thylar crew through the station's windows, pressed against the glass in their emergency shelters. The Thylar were tough aliens who looked like walking lizards with 4 arms, and they were known throughout the galaxy as fearless miners who could work in the most dangerous conditions. If they were hiding in emergency shelters, something truly terrible had happened. But what made the scene even more shocking were the 3 ships floating nearby. These weren't simple mining vessels or transport ships. These were full military. Cruisers from the Imperium Navy, the most powerful space force in the known galaxy. Each ship was over 1 kilometer long, with smooth silver hulls that seemed to bend light around them. Their weapons could destroy entire planets, and their shields could stop almost any attack, and they were all completely dead. "This is insane," Park Min-ho whispered as he stared at the tactical display. His voice was barely audible over the quiet hum of the Defiance's engines. "Those ships have technology we can't even understand, and they got wiped out like they were made of paper." The Imperium cruisers had been built using science that humanity wouldn't discover for centuries. Their computers could think faster than 1,000,000 human brains working together. Their weapons could hit targets from halfway across a solar system. Their engines could fold space and time to travel between stars in minutes instead of years, but something had killed them all without leaving a single survivor. Captain Hyun studied the sensor readings, trying to understand what had happened. The ships showed no physical damage from weapons fire. Their hulls weren't broken or melted. Instead, they looked like someone had simply turned off a switch and left them floating in space like abandoned toys. "The Void Reapers," he said quietly, recognizing the signs from intelligence reports. "They don't destroy ships with weapons. They use computer viruses that turn advanced technology against itself. The Void Reapers were one of the galaxy's greatest fears. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They appeared without warning, attacked with invisible weapons that corrupted computer systems and disappeared just as quickly. The more advanced a ship's technology, the easier it was for the Reapers to take control of it." "That's exactly why we might succeed," Hyun continued, turning to his crew. "Their weapons are designed to attack sophisticated computer systems, but our ship—" He gestured around the bridge, which looked primitive compared to the dead Imperium cruisers. "We're too simple for them to understand." Pilot Choi Da-un was already working at her station, her hands moving over physical switches and dials instead of touching computer screens. "Can you plot an approach vector manually?" the captain asked. "Already working on it, sir," she replied, without looking up. The computer displays around her were flickering and showing error messages, confused by the strange electronic signals coming from the Void Reapers. But Da-un ignored the machines completely, relying instead on her own eyes and instincts to guide the ship. "These Reapers jam electronic systems," she explained, as she manually adjusted their course. "But they won't expect someone flying by. Pure instinct. Most pilots in the galaxy can't even start their ships without computer assistance." As the Defiance moved closer to the mining station, dark shapes began emerging from behind the asteroids. The Void Reapers looked like mechanical spiders made of black metal, each one the size of a small building. They moved through space without any visible engines, gliding silently between the rocks like hunters stalking their prey. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. When the Reapers tried to hack into the Defiance's computer systems, they found mostly manual controls and backup systems that didn't rely on advanced technology. Engineer Kim Soo-jin had spent months building redundant systems that could work even if the main computers failed completely. "Power's being rerouted through the backup systems," she called out from her station. "They can't take control of systems that barely use computers in the first place." Weapons specialist Kang Ho-seok began firing in patterns that no computer would ever calculate. Instead of using mathematical formulas to predict where targets would be, he relied on human intuition and years of practice. When the Reapers adapted to one firing pattern, he simply switched to a completely different approach. "They're trying to learn our tactics," he shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "But how do you program a computer to predict pure human creativity?" The Void Reapers had conquered advanced civilizations by turning their own technology against them. But the Defiants fought like humans had always fought, with improvisation, adaptation, and the refusal to follow predictable patterns. When one strategy stopped working, they invented a new one on the spot. 4 hours later, the mechanical spiders retreated into the asteroid field, their programming unable to understand opponents who refused to behave logically. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Reapers had been defeated not by superior technology, but by the simple human ability to think outside the box. News traveled fast through the dark corners of the galaxy, especially when it was the kind of news that gave hope to the hopeless. Within days of the Kepler 7th rescue, every pirate bar, smuggler's den, and underground meeting place was buzzing with the same incredible story. A primitive human ship had done what 3 advanced Imperium cruisers could not. They had defeated the Void Reapers and saved lives. At first, nobody believed it. The story seemed too impossible, like something from a children's fairy tale. How could a ship built from scrap metal and determination succeed where the galaxy's most advanced technology had failed? But then the details started coming in, and witnesses began speaking up. The Thyla survivors from Kepler 7th were proud warrior miners who had never asked anyone for help in their entire history. They were tough, independent, and famously stubborn. But when they described watching the human ship dance through space like it was alive, fighting with tactics that made no sense, but somehow worked perfectly, even the biggest skeptics started to listen. "They saved us when the mighty Imperium Navy could not," declared Thyla Chief Miner Zekthor, in a secret transmission that spread through dozens of star systems. "These humans fight with their hearts and minds, not just their weapons. They are worthy of our respect." The Thyla did something they had never done before. They offered their mining station as a secret supply base for the humans. This was huge news in the underground networks. The Thyla controlled some of the richest mining operations in their sector, and they had just declared themselves allies of Earth. But they weren't the only ones. The aquatic Merhai, who lived in the ocean worlds that the Imperium considered worthless, began sharing their detailed star charts with Captain Hyun's crew. These maps showed safe routes through dangerous space, hidden refueling stations, and secret bases that had been built over centuries by species who had learned to survive without the Imperium's protection. "The small fish swim together to avoid the big predators," explained Merhai navigator Splash of Silver in her bubbling underwater language. "Perhaps it is time for all small fish to work together." Even more surprising were the reports coming from species that usually never talked to outsiders. The crystal-based Shard Collective, who communicated through light patterns that most translators couldn't handle, sent a simple message: "Light finds its way through darkness. Humans are light." In the gleaming towers of Zerion Prime, Admiral Vextar tried to dismiss these reports as nonsense and propaganda. He sat in his luxurious office, surrounded by holographic displays showing the vast reach of Imperium power, and refused to believe that one primitive ship could be causing so much trouble. "Exaggerated stories spread by malcontents and rebels," he told his staff during their daily briefings. "One lucky encounter with some malfunctioning Void Reapers has been blown completely out of proportion." But his intelligence officers were painting a very different picture. Reports were coming in from dozens of different star systems, all describing the same impossible ship, performing the same impossible rescues. The Defiants had been spotted pulling trapped miners from collapsing asteroids, defending peaceful colonies from raiders, and even delivering medical supplies to plague-stricken worlds that the Imperium had written off as lost causes. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, The human vessel's crew has grown significantly. Our sources indicate they're actively recruiting volunteers from non-aligned worlds. This news made Vextar's four arms twitch with annoyance. Non-aligned worlds were supposed to be desperate for Imperium protection, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they received. The idea that they were instead joining up with primitive humans was deeply disturbing. "Let them play hero," Vextar sneered, his translated voice dripping with false confidence. "When they encounter a real threat, their primitive technology will fail them. Then these foolish species will come crawling back, begging for our protection." But even as he spoke these words, Vextar knew something was changing in the galaxy. The careful balance of power that kept the Imperium in control was starting to shift, and it was all because of one stubborn human ship that refused to give up. Meanwhile, aboard the Defiance, Captain Hyun was welcoming new crew members almost every week. Engineer Jiang Subin had joined them from the mining colonies, bringing knowledge of how to repair equipment using whatever materials were available. Her hands were scarred from years of fixing broken machinery with improvised tools, and she could make almost anything work with enough determination and creativity. Pilot Oh Min-seo came from the Outer Rim territories, worlds so far from civilization that help never came when you needed it. She had learned to fly by necessity, piloting cargo ships through dangerous space where one mistake meant death. Her skills complemented Da-Un's perfectly, giving them two pilots who could navigate by instinct when computers failed. Communications. Officer Yu Jae-min had grown up on a world the Imperium had abandoned after strip mining its valuable resources. He spoke 17 different alien languages and knew how to repair communication equipment using spare parts and pure stubbornness. Each new crew member brought skills learned through necessity rather than expensive training, creating a team that could handle any challenge through teamwork and human ingenuity. The Vortex Nebula was a nightmare made of swirling colors and deadly energy. From a distance it looked beautiful, like a giant flower blooming in space, with petals of pink and purple gas stretching across light years. But up close it was one of the most dangerous places in the known galaxy. The nebula's exotic radiation could fry computer circuits in seconds and turn sophisticated navigation systems into useless junk. 17 different Imperium expeditions had tried to explore the nebula's depths. 17 times, advanced ships equipped with the finest technology in the galaxy had entered the swirling chaos. And 17 times, nothing had come back out. Not even emergency beacons or distress signals. The ships had simply vanished, swallowed, by the rainbow storms that danced through the nebula's heart. At the center of this cosmic death trap lay something that had driven the Imperium to keep trying despite the losses. Intelligence reports spoke of the Omega device, an ancient weapon left behind by a civilization that had vanished millions of years ago. According to the legends, this device had the power to reshape entire star systems or destroy them completely. It was the kind of weapon that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Command is actually asking us to volunteer for this suicide mission," Engineer Park Min-ho reported, staring at his communication screen in complete disbelief. He had to read the message 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The official transmission was polite but clear. The Imperium was offering the humans a chance to prove themselves by attempting what their finest ships could not accomplish. Of course, they phrased it as a glorious opportunity to serve galactic civilization, but everyone knew what they really meant. They were sending the troublesome humans to die in the most dangerous place they could find. Captain Hyun read the message over Park's shoulder and smiled grimly. "They expect us to die trying," he said quietly. "That's exactly why we might succeed." The logic was simple but brilliant. Every previous expedition had failed because the nebula's radiation destroyed their advanced computer systems. Ships that relied on artificial intelligence for navigation, life support and basic operations became helpless metal coffins the moment they entered the nebula. But the Defiance was different. It was already primitive by galactic standards, built to function even when sophisticated technology failed. "If we're going to do this," Captain Hyun told his crew, "we need to become even more primitive than we already are." The preparation took 3 weeks. Kim Soo-jin and her engineering team worked around the clock, stripping out every piece of unnecessary technology from the ship. Computer displays were replaced with simple analog gauges that showed pressure, temperature, and power levels, using mechanical needles and dials. Electronic navigation systems gave way to star charts printed on actual paper, and calculations done by hand with pencils and calculators. "It's like turning our spaceship into a sailing ship from ancient Earth," engineer Jang Soo-bin explained, as she installed manual backup controls for the life support systems. "When the electronic systems fail, we'll still be able to breathe, navigate, and fly using nothing but human skill and determination." The most challenging part was the navigation system. Pilot Choi Da-eun spent hours practicing with mechanical instruments that hadn't been used on spaceships for centuries. She learned to plot courses using star positions visible through the ship's windows, calculating their path through space the same way ancient sailors had navigated Earth's oceans. "This is insane," she muttered as she practiced taking readings with a device that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I'm going to navigate through one of the most dangerous regions in the galaxy using equipment that's older than my grandmother." But as the days passed, something interesting happened. Da-eun discovered that flying without computers forced her to pay attention to things she had never noticed before. She began to feel the subtle gravitational pulls of distant stars, sense the rhythm of space itself, and develop an intuition for navigation that no computer could match. When the Defiance finally entered the Vortex Nebula, it looked like a tiny metal speck diving into a storm of liquid fire. The moment they crossed the nebula's boundary, every electronic system on the ship began screaming warnings before shutting down completely. The main computer displays went dark, communication systems failed, and even the simple digital clocks stopped working. "It's like flying blind," Pilot Da-eun whispered, as rainbow storms of energy battered their hull. The ship shook and groaned around them, and through the windows they could see curtains of colored light, dancing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "No," Captain Hyun corrected, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "It's like flying human." For 6 days they pushed deeper into the nebula, using nothing but human senses and mechanical instruments. Engineer Kim Soo-jin kept the engines running by listening to their rhythm and adjusting fuel flow by hand. Communications Officer Yoo Jae-min navigated by watching the stars through a telescope when the energy storms cleared enough to see them. The entire crew worked together like the parts of a single organism, each person doing their job without computers or automated systems to help. Deep in the nebula's heart, where the energy storms were strongest and the radiation could kill a person in minutes, they found what they were looking for. But it wasn't what anyone had expected. The Omega device was gone. In its place was an empty chamber carved from asteroid rock, and on the walls were messages written in dozens of ancient languages. Communications Officer Yoo Jae-min worked for hours translating the alien scripts, piecing together words from civilizations that had died out eons ago. The message was simple but profound. "We destroyed our creation before it could destroy us. Let this be wisdom for those who follow." The ancient builders had realized that some weapons were too dangerous to exist, even for their creators. Rather than risk the Omega device falling into the wrong hands or being used to destroy innocent worlds, they had chosen to destroy it themselves. The empty chamber was their gift to future civilizations, a lesson about the wisdom of knowing when not to use the power you possess. The attack came from the darkness between galaxies, where no living thing was supposed to exist. At first, the border sensors detected nothing more than cosmic dust drifting through empty space. Then the dust began to move with purpose, flowing together like droplets of water forming a stream. Within hours, what had seemed like harmless debris had transformed into something that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares. The cosmic swarm didn't look like any alien species anyone had ever encountered. They were more like living clouds made of billions of tiny creatures, each no bigger than a grain of sand but working together with perfect coordination. When they moved, they flowed through space like liquid metal, shifting shapes and colors in patterns that hurt to watch for too long. The first contact happened at the Meridian defense line, where 3 full Imperium fleets were stationed to guard. against threats from deep space. These weren't patrol ships or explorers. These were the most powerful warships in the galaxy, each fleet capable of destroying entire solar systems if necessary. Admiral Kosovel commanded over 200 vessels, equipped with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The swarm flowed around the Imperium ships, like water around rocks in a stream. When the fleet fired their plasma cannons, the creatures absorbed the energy and used it to grow larger. When they launched quantum torpedoes, the swarm simply parted to let them pass through harmlessly, then closed ranks again. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy the Imperium had developed over thousands of years was useless. Worse yet, the swarm seemed to learn from each encounter. When the Second Fleet tried different weapons, the creatures adapted even faster. By the time the Third Fleet engaged, the swarm was anticipating their moves before they made them. 3 of the most powerful battle groups in galactic history were consumed in less than 6 hours, their ships broken apart and absorbed into the growing alien mass. The survivors' reports painted a picture of an enemy that defied understanding. The swarm didn't just destroy ships, it studied them, learned from them, and became stronger. It was as if the creatures were taking apart Imperium technology, piece by piece, figuring out how everything worked, and then using that knowledge to become more dangerous. Panic spread through the galactic government faster than the swarm itself. Emergency sessions were called, military leaders demanded more ships and bigger weapons, and politicians argued about evacuation plans. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The Imperium's mighty war machine was helpless against an enemy that grew stronger every time they fought it. In desperation, they did something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They contacted Earth. The message was carefully worded to avoid admitting weakness. They called it a temporary alliance and spoke of sharing resources to face a mutual threat. But everyone understood what it really meant. The proud Imperium was asking primitive humans for help because they had run out of options. Captain Hyun received the transmission while the Defiance was docked at a hidden refueling station in the Outer Rim. He read the message twice, then looked at his crew with a mixture of amazement and grim determination. "They're not asking for our help," he said quietly. "They're begging for it." Within days, a small flotilla of human ships had assembled at the coordinates the Imperium provided. Besides the Defiance, there were 5 other vessels: the Resilience, the Audacity, the Stubborn Hope, the Never Surrender, and the Second Chance. Each ship was built using the same philosophy as the Defiance: simple, reliable, and designed to keep working when everything else failed. When they arrived at the battle zone, Captain Hyun understood why the Imperium forces had been so easily defeated. The swarm had grown to enormous size, stretching across several light minutes of space like a living nebula. It pulsed with absorbed energy from the destroyed fleets, and patterns of light raced through its structure, like thoughts moving through a vast brain. But where the Imperium commanders saw an unstoppable monster, the humans saw something different. Engineer Kim Soo-jin spent hours studying sensor readings of the swarm's behavior, noting how it moved and what seemed to interest it most. Pilot Oh Min-seo tracked its movement patterns, looking for rhythms and preferences in how it navigated. Through space, Communications Officer Yoo Jae-min made the most important discovery. While monitoring radio frequencies, he detected something that the Imperium's sophisticated sensors had completely missed. The swarm was singing. "It's not random noise," he explained excitedly. "There are patterns, repetitions, variations. It's definitely communication, but it's not trying to talk to us. It's like it's calling out to something that isn't there." Captain Hyun listened to the recordings, hearing haunting melodies that seemed to carry sadness and longing across the void. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. "They're not monsters," he realized, his voice filled with understanding. "They're hungry, lost, looking for something they can't find." The solution came not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the most human trait of all: empathy. Instead of fighting the swarm, the humans began studying what it was searching for. They analyzed its feeding patterns, tracked where it preferred to go, and slowly began to understand what it needed. The swarm wasn't trying to conquer the galaxy, It was trying to go home, but after traveling between galaxies for millions of years, it had forgotten the way. It was consuming ships and technology not out of malice, but because it was desperately hungry for the exotic matter it needed to survive the journey back to wherever it had come from. The humans didn't fight the swarm. Instead, they helped it find what it was looking for. The news of humanity's success against the cosmic swarm spread through the galaxy like wildfire, impossible to contain or control. Within weeks, every species from the core worlds to the outer rim had heard the incredible story. The primitive humans hadn't just survived an encounter with the galaxy's newest nightmare. They had actually solved a problem that had destroyed 3 entire Imperium fleets. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives who had laughed at Earth's membership application just months earlier now sat in uncomfortable silence as the reports were read aloud. The humans had accomplished something that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about power, technology, and warfare. The swarm consumed our most advanced vessels in minutes, reported Admiral Kosovel, one of the few Imperium officers to survive the initial attacks. Their quantum shields, plasma cannons, and AI-guided weapons were useless. But somehow, 6 primitive human ships managed to not only survive, but actually communicate with the entities. The word primitive hung in the air like an accusation. How could primitive technology succeed where advanced systems had failed so completely? The implications were disturbing for species that had built their entire civilization around the belief that more advanced always meant better. But not everyone was impressed by humanity's achievement. In his private chambers high above Zerion Prime, Admiral Vextar paced back and forth on his 4 legs, his oil-slick skin shifting colors with agitation. He had spent decades climbing the ranks of Imperium power, and his authority was built on one simple principle: advanced species ruled over primitive ones because they were naturally superior. The humans must be eliminated, he told his inner circle of trusted officers and political allies, before their infection spreads any further through the galaxy. The word infection was carefully chosen. Vextar didn't see humanity's success as an inspiration. He saw it as a disease that threatened the natural order of things. If primitive species began to believe they could solve problems without Imperium guidance, the entire power structure that kept advanced civilizations in control would collapse. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "our agents are confirming disturbing trends throughout the non-aligned territories. Species are beginning to modify their ships using what they call human principles." The reports painted a picture that made Vextar's worst fears seem conservative. Across dozens of star systems, alien engineers were installing manual override controls in their automated ships. They were building redundant backup systems for critical functions, creating analog instruments that could work even when computers failed, and most dangerously of all, they were training their crews to think creatively instead of following established procedures. "The Thyla Mining Guild has retrofitted their entire fleet," the intelligence chief continued. "They're calling it adaptive engineering, the ability to solve problems with whatever materials are available instead of waiting for proper replacement parts. The Merhai have established what they call intuitive navigation training programs," added another officer. "They're teaching their pilots to fly by instinct when their computers are compromised, just like the human pilot demonstrated during the swarm crisis. Even worse, species that had never cooperated before were now working together, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that bypassed traditional Imperium trade channels. The careful system of dependencies that kept lesser species reliant on advanced civilizations was breaking down. The Defiance itself had become more than just a ship, it was a symbol. Stories of Captain Hune and his crew were being told in languages the humans had never heard of, on worlds they had never visited. Children of a dozen different species were playing games where they pretended to be brave human engineers, fixing impossible problems with creativity and determination. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Vextar declared, his translated voice carrying cold determination. "If these primitive ideas spread to the core worlds, our entire civilization will regress into chaos." Meanwhile, aboard the Defiance in Chi, a hidden asteroid base, Captain Hyun was receiving very different kinds of reports. Messages poured in through secret channels established by their growing network of allies. Thyla mining chiefs sent coded warnings about increased Imperium military activity. Merhai scouts reported massive fleet movements toward the core systems. Even species that had never contacted humans before were reaching out with urgent intelligence. "Captain," Engineer Yang Subin said, her face pale as she decoded the latest batch of messages. "They're coming for Earth. Our contacts are reporting massive fleet buildup in the core systems, ships from every major Imperium world, all heading toward human space." The scale of the threat was staggering. Vextar wasn't just planning a military action. He was assembling an armada designed to make an example of humanity that would be remembered for generations. The message would be clear. This is what happens to species that challenge the natural order. "How long do we have?" Captain Hyun asked, studying the intelligence reports with growing concern. "Maybe 2 weeks before they reach Earth," Communications Officer Yu Jae-min calculated. "They're not trying to hide their movements. They want everyone to know what's coming." Pilot Choi Da-un looked up from her navigation charts. "We're 3 weeks away from home at maximum speed. Even with all the modifications Kim's made to the engines, the mathematics were simple and terrifying. The Imperium fleet would reach Earth before the Defiance could get there to warn them. Humanity's homeworld would face the galaxy's most powerful military force, with no idea what was coming." Captain Hyun stood quietly for a long moment, weighing their options. They could try to send a warning through normal communication channels, but Imperium forces would likely intercept and block any message. They could attempt to reach Earth by a more direct route, but that would mean flying through heavily patrolled space, where they would almost certainly be captured or destroyed. "Then we'd better get home," Hyun decided, his voice carrying the quiet determination that had brought them this far. "It's time to show them what humans can really do." But even as he spoke, Captain Hyun knew they wouldn't be facing this threat alone. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had allies now, species that believed in the power of creativity over technology, determination over automation, and hope over despair. The massive Imperium armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system like a steel storm cloud blotting out the stars. Admiral Vexitar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Nearly 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had answered his call. Sleek destroyers from the core worlds, massive battle cruisers from the military academies, and specialized assault ships designed to break planetary defenses. "Sensors are scanning the primitive system," his tactical officer reported, his 4 eyes focused on the glowing displays. "We should have complete readings on Earth's defenses within minutes." Vextar expected to see exactly what the intelligence reports had described: a small number of crude human vessels defending their homeworld, maybe reinforced by a few obsolete ships from sympathetic species. The plan was simple: destroy the human fleet quickly and decisively, then broadcast the footage throughout the galaxy as a warning to anyone else who might be tempted to challenge Imperium authority. But as the sensor sweeps completed their scans, the tactical officer's confident expression changed to confusion, then disbelief, then something approaching panic. "Sir," he stammered, his translated voice crackling with static, "this is impossible. I'm reading hundreds of vessels throughout the system. Half these species were listed as non-combatant in our databases." The main display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Sol system that made Vextar's skin change colors in shock. Ships were everywhere, not just orbiting Earth but positioned throughout the asteroid belt, hiding behind moons, and even stationed near the outer gas giants. The variety was staggering. Thyla mining vessels had been converted into impromptu warships, their industrial cutting beams repurposed as weapons. Merhai exploration craft darted between larger ships like schools of metallic fish, their hulls gleaming with modifications that looked like they had been designed by artists rather than engineers. Even the peaceful Zephyrian traders had arrived, their cargo ships bristling with weapons that seemed to have been bolted on as an afterthought. "How many ships are we facing?" Vextar demanded, his forearms gesturing angrily at the display. "Approximately 400 vessels, sir," the tactical officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But most of them are using technology we don't recognize. Our computers can't classify half of these designs." The reason for the confusion was simple. The defending fleet wasn't following any standard design principles. Each ship had been modified using what the galaxy was beginning to call human engineering, the art of making things work through creativity and determination rather than following established procedures. At the center of this unlikely armada, the Defiance had been joined by two sister ships built using the same philosophy. The Resilience looked like it had been assembled from spare parts found in a dozen different junkyards, while the Audacity appeared to be held together by determination and prayer. But all three vessels hummed with quiet confidence, their crews ready for the fight of their lives. Captain Hyun stood on the bridge of the Defiance, coordinating the defense through a communication network that should have been impossible to establish. Engineer Kim Soo-jin had spent months teaching alien crews how to modify their ships with manual backup systems, redundant controls, and the kind of jury-rigged solutions that drove Imperium engineers crazy. "All ships, this is Defiance Actual." Hyun spoke into his communicator, knowing his words were being translated into dozens of languages throughout the fleet. "Remember what we've learned. When their computers fail, trust your instincts. When their weapons adapt, change your tactics. When they expect you to follow the rules, make up new ones." The battle began when Vextar ordered his fleet to advance. In perfect formation, a massive wall of ships moving forward with mathematical precision. It was the kind of attack that had conquered 1,000 worlds, overwhelming defenders through superior technology and flawless coordination. But the defending fleet didn't behave like any enemy the Imperium had ever faced. Instead of forming their own battle line, the ships scattered in all directions like startled birds. Some dove toward the inner planets, others climbed above the plane of the solar system, and a few even headed directly toward the advancing Imperium forces in patterns. That made no tactical sense. "They're breaking formation," Vextar's tactical officer reported. "Should we adjust our attack vector to compensate?" "No," Vextar replied confidently. "Let them scatter. We'll destroy them one by one." But as the Imperium ships tried to target individual vessels, they discovered something disturbing. The defenders weren't just running away randomly. They were executing maneuvers that no computer could predict. A Thyla mining ship would suddenly reverse direction and ram an Imperium destroyer, using its reinforced hull as a weapon. Merhai scouts would disappear into the asteroid belt, then emerge behind enemy lines to attack with surgical precision. The most frustrating part was that every time the Imperium forces adapted to one tactic, the defenders would simply switch to something completely different. When plasma cannons proved ineffective against modified hulls, the humans started using kinetic weapons made from asteroid fragments. When quantum shields blocked energy attacks, alien crews began ramming their ships into enemy vessels with suicidal courage. Engineer Kim Soo-jin's modifications had spread throughout the Allied fleet like a beneficial virus. When sophisticated targeting systems were jammed by Imperium electronic warfare, manual gun sights took over. When automated navigation failed, pilots flew by instinct and experience. When elegant solutions proved inadequate, crude but effective ones filled the gap. The turning point came when a group of converted cargo ships managed to disable the Eternal Dominion's main weapon systems using nothing but electromagnetic pulse devices built from mining equipment. As Vextar's flagship drifted helplessly, smaller vessels swarmed around it like angry insects, each one using different tactics that made coordinated defense impossible. For the first time in galactic history, the Imperium's technological superiority meant nothing against enemies who treated every limitation as a problem to solve, rather than an insurmountable barrier. The defeat of Admiral Vextar's armada sent shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. For thousands of years, the Imperium had been the undisputed master of known space, their advanced technology and overwhelming military might keeping hundreds of species in line. The idea that they could be beaten by primitive humans and their ragtag allies was so impossible that many worlds initially refused to believe the news reports. But the evidence was undeniable. Holographic recordings showed Imperium warships drifting helplessly through space, while converted mining vessels and jury-rigged cargo ships celebrated around them. The mighty Eternal Dominion, flagship of the core fleet, had been disabled by electromagnetic pulse weapons built from asteroid mining equipment. The galaxy's most sophisticated military force had been outmaneuvered by opponents who solved problems with creativity instead of superior firepower. Within weeks, the political landscape began to shift in ways that no one had predicted. Worlds that had spent centuries begging for Imperium protection suddenly stopped sending tribute payments. Mining colonies that had quietly accepted exploitation for generations began demanding fair treatment. Even some of the advanced core worlds started questioning whether the old system of technological hierarchy really made sense anymore. The Imperium's government tried to maintain control through emergency sessions and emergency powers, but their authority was crumbling faster than they could respond. When species across the galaxy saw that the supposedly invincible Imperium could be defeated by determination and creative thinking, they began to wonder what else might be possible. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held on neutral ground aboard a massive space station that had been hastily constructed. In the no-man's land between Imperium and non-aligned space, representatives from nearly 1,000 species gathered to witness what many were calling the most important political event in galactic history. Captain Li Hyun walked into the Great Assembly Hall wearing his simple Earth uniform, looking strangely small among the towering aliens and exotic beings that filled the chamber. The Defiance, scarred but unbroken from countless battles, was docked outside the station as a visible symbol of humanity's unlikely journey from rejected applicants to galactic game changers. Representatives of the galaxy, Hyun began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. 6 months ago you laughed at our prototypes because you saw only what they lacked. We saw what they could become. His words were being translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously, carried to every corner of known space by communication networks that spanned the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, beings stopped what they were doing to listen to the human who had changed everything. Our strength was never in our ships, Hyun continued, gesturing toward the viewport where the battered Defiance was visible against the stars. It was in our refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. When you told us our technology was too primitive, we made it work anyway. When you said our methods were impossible, we proved you wrong. When you tried to destroy us, we showed you a better way. In the gallery section reserved for observers, former Admiral Vexitar sat in disgrace, stripped of his rank and authority. His oil-slick skin had turned a dull grey color that reflected his shame and defeat. Around him, other former Imperium officials watched in stunned silence as species after species stood up to announce their intention to join the new Terran alliance. The Thyla representative spoke first, his forearms raised in a gesture of solidarity. The humans taught us that strength comes not from advanced weapons, but from the courage to adapt when everything seems hopeless. The Merhai delegation bubbled their agreement through their translation devices. They showed us that the most sophisticated solution is sometimes the simplest one, and that creativity matters more than computing power. One by one, species that had been dismissed as primitive or irrelevant by Imperium standards stepped forward to pledge their support for humanity's new vision of galactic cooperation. These weren't the advanced core world civilizations with their quantum computers and reality-bending technology. These were the miners, traders, explorers and survivors who had learned to make things work through determination and ingenuity. Engineer Kim Soo-jin watched the proceedings from the Defiance's engineering section, surrounded by reports that made her smile with quiet pride. Across the galaxy, alien crews were implementing what they called human engineering principles, building redundant systems, installing manual backups, and training their people to think creatively when technology failed. A Zephyrian trade vessel had successfully completed a supply run to a plague-stricken world after their navigation computer failed, using star charts drawn by hand and navigation techniques learned from human pilots. A Thyla mining operation had increased their efficiency by 30%, by encouraging workers to suggest improvements instead of following rigid procedures. Even some core world laboratories were experimenting with intuitive research methods that relied on scientist instinct rather than purely automated analysis. Pilot Choi Da-yoon had established the galaxy's first interspecies flight academy on a small moon orbiting a gas giant in neutral space. Students came from dozens of worlds to learn what she called instinctive navigation, the art of flying by feel when computers couldn't be trusted. Her most popular course was called Flying Human, which taught alien pilots how to trust their own judgment instead of relying entirely on automated systems. "The galaxy has been running on autopilot for too long," she explained to a class of mixed-species students, their various appendages working controls that had been deliberately designed to require manual input. When your computers fail, when your weapons don't work, when everything goes wrong, that's when you find out what you're really made of. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal. Many of the advanced civilizations continued to resist the changes, clinging to their belief that technological superiority was the only measure of worth. Some worlds tried to maintain the old system of Imperium dominance, but without the military might to enforce it, their authority was largely meaningless. But across the galaxy, a quiet revolution was taking place. Species were learning that limitations existed mainly in the mind, and that the greatest weapon against impossible odds was the audacity to try anyway. They discovered that cooperation worked better than domination, that creativity was more valuable than pure processing power, and that sometimes the most advanced solution was knowing when to be simple. The Defiance continued to patrol the space lanes, no longer as an outcast ship proving itself worthy, but as the flagship of a new kind of galactic civilization. Humanity's prototypes had indeed changed everything, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but by showing the universe that there was always another way to solve any problem if you were brave enough to try.